Rain drifted softly against the wide windows of the Bluebird Diner, streaking the glass in long watery trails that blurred the neon sign outside. Inside, the air carried the usual mixture of sizzling oil, brewed coffee, and the faint tang of bleach that clung to the floor tiles. It was the kind of place locals came to without thinking, and for Marina Duvall, it was less a workplace than a second skin. Her shoulders sagged from the weight of another late shift, yet she still straightened the collar of her uniform when the doorbell chimed. A gust of damp night air swept in along with a man who immediately drew the attention of the entire diner. His presence shifted the room, as if the regulars instinctively hushed themselves to accommodate him. He was tall, his dark suit cut with meticulous precision, the fabric catching light in a way that announced its expense. Nathaniel Cross did not need to make an entrance. His silence was enough. He walked with quiet confidence to a booth near the window, slid into the cracked vinyl seat, and sat with the composure of someone accustomed to being observed. Marina smoothed her apron and picked up a menu. She approached, rehearsing her usual cheerful tone. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you started with something?" "Coffee. Black." His eyes, an unnervingly clear gray, met hers for the briefest moment before drifting to the window. His voice carried the resonance of authority, low and deliberate. She scribbled the order and retreated to the counter. Her coworker, Sierra, nudged her. "Do you know who that is?" "That's Nathaniel Cross, Cross Industries. My uncle says his company practically built half of Jersey City." Marina poured the coffee, shrugging. "To me, he's just another customer." But even as she said it, she felt a prickling awareness. The diner seemed to hold its breath around him. Balancing the cup and saucer, she returned to his booth. As she set the coffee down, the overhead light caught on something at his wrist. The gleam drew her gaze before she could stop herself. A gold bracelet, heavy and ornate, its surface etched with the image of a phoenix, wings unfurled. In the center of its chest, a turquoise gem glowed like a captured flame. A memory slammed into her, so sudden she nearly dropped the saucer. Her mother's bedside table, a small velvet box. Inside it, the same design, down to the phoenix and the turquoise eye. It had always been her mother's most treasured possession, a promise from her father Owen never to sell it, no matter how tight the bills became. The words slipped out of Marina before she could restrain them. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Disillusion, hello, sir. My mom has a bracelet just like yours." Punishable of silverware from the other tables died away. Nathaniel's hand froze halfway to the cup. Slowly, he drew it back, his gaze slicing into her with sudden intensity. "Yes, that's impossible," he said, each syllable sharpened to ice. "This bracelet has been in my family for over a century. If your mother has the same—" He paused, eyes narrowing. "Then she is either a liar or a thief." The words landed like a slap. Marina blinked, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't even move. Around them, the diner seemed paralyzed. The hum of fluorescent lights sounded like a roar in the silence. "My mother isn't—" she started, but the protest died in her chest. Nathaniel rose with controlled precision, sliding out of the booth. He placed a few crisp bills on the table, more than the coffee was worth, but it felt less like a tip and more like an insult. Without another glance, he straightened his jacket and turned toward the door. Marina stood frozen, clutching her order pad as if it were a lifeline. Her hands trembled. She could feel Sierra's eyes on her from behind the counter, wide with alarm, but she couldn't meet them. At the door, Nathaniel hesitated for the briefest moment. The rain behind him cast a sheen across the threshold, and in that pause, he looked back. Not with dismissal this time, but with something unreadable. A warning, perhaps. A promise of questions yet to come. Then he pushed the door open and disappeared into the wet night, leaving only the fading echo of the bell and the weight of accusation heavy in the air. Marina exhaled shakily, her pulse thundering in her ears. She tried to steady her breathing, but her gaze kept falling back to the spot where he had sat, to the image of that phoenix glimmering beneath the diner's tired lights. She knew one thing with unsettling certainty. The bracelet her mother guarded so fiercely was no ordinary keepsake. And Nathaniel Cross was not finished with her. The automatic doors at St. Mary's parted with a weary sigh, and Marina stepped into the bright corridor as if into another kind of weather. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and warm linen, a clean, careful scent that always made her think of laundry days and sleepless nights. Fluorescent panels hummed above her. She pressed her palm to her sternum to quiet the thudding that hadn't settled since the diner. Her mother's room was halfway down the hall, past a flickering exit sign and a vending machine that coughed out paper cups of coffee too thin to taste like anything. Marina paused outside the door, gathering herself, then pushed it open with her shoulder. Evelyn Duval slept on her side, face turned toward the window, gray hair braided loosely against the pillow. The small room held only what it had to: a chair, a metal tray on wheels, a narrow dresser with a chipped corner. The monitor by the bed kept time in polite beeps, a steady metronome that made the room feel held together. Knee on the dresser sat the dark blue velvet box. Even from the doorway, she recognized the nap of the fabric, rubbed thin along the edges where fingers had worried it over the years. That box had lived in their tiny apartment like a quiet relative, never loud, always present. There were months when the electricity was a question mark and the rent was a prayer. Yet that box never went to the pawn shop. The phoenix's feathers caught the light in fine lines, and at the heart, a turquoise stone glinted, more sky than sea, with a vein like lightning trapped within. It looked less like jewelry and more like a sentence written in metal, something old and sure of itself. Her throat tightened. The memory rose whole, being 8 years old on a stormy afternoon, her mother kneeling beside her with the box on a blanket spread across the floor. "You don't wear it," Marina had said then, tracing the tiny wing with a blunt finger. "Not for parties? Not for anything?" Evelyn had smiled, tired and warm. "Some things you keep so they can keep you. This isn't for show, it's for remembering." "Welcome," Marina whispered, the present settling over the memory like a second sheet. "I'm here." Yes, fluttering open. They were the same blue they'd always been, though rimmed with the red of short sleep and long worry. "You look pale," she said, voice rusty. "Long shift?" Conflicting. Marina swallowed. The image of the man in the suit flashed again, the sharpness of his tone. Someone came into the diner. He was wearing a bracelet, like this one. Evelyn's gaze slid to the open box. The expression that moved across her face wasn't surprise so much as recognition, and then caution. "Close it, honey." Marina hesitated, thumb brushing the cool curve of the clasp. "Do you remember what Grandpa said? One day this will be proof?" "Proof of what?" "He said many things over the years," Evelyn answered, the old softness tightening. She eased herself up on the pillows, the monitor answering with a brief uptick. "Some doors are best left closed." Marina sat in the chair, the vinyl sighed under her. "A man in a suit told me this bracelet can only belong to his family, that if you have one too, then you're lying, or you stole it." The shame of repeating it made her cheeks warm. "I know that isn't true, but he spoke like truth belonged to him," and warm folded on the blanket.
People who have always been believed forget what doubt feels like.
She glanced at the bracelet again, and something unspoken pressed at the corner of her mouth.
Your grandfather was a good man. He gave this to me with a warning and a blessing. He believed in right things, even when wrong things were loud.
"I saw the one at the diner,"
Marina said.
It felt like the same breath in a different body. The wings, the stone.
She leaned closer to the box. The turquoise was the same exact hue she'd seen under the diner lights, not brighter, not duller, simply itself. The metalwork, too, had the same sure hand, the same rhythm of feathers. It wasn't a resemblance, it was a match. There are duplications in the world, items made by the dozen, the 100. But this did not belong to that category. It had the fingerprint of intention. If two existed, they were meant to. A calm settled inside her, surprising in its steadiness. It wasn't relief and it wasn't anger. It was the balance that comes when doubt falls through a hole in its pocket and is lost. "It's real," she said, more to herself than to her mother. "It's not a story we told to make hard years easier. It's as real as these walls." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Reality is not what others allow you to keep," she murmured. "It's what you refuse to hand over." They sat in the small white room, the box open between them like a window to a past neither of them fully owned. The rain outside had eased to a whisper, tapping the glass with gentle fingers. Marina wanted to press for more, names, dates, the shape of the warning her grandfather had carried, but the lines around her mother's mouth pulled her back. "Rest," she said. "We can talk when you feel stronger." Evelyn nodded and let her head sink into the pillow. "You've always been steady," she breathed, "even when the world tries to tug you sideways." Deported the box with care, the lid settling with that old soft sound. She set it where her mother could see it, the square of velvet, a small firm anchor in a room full of blinking lights. The monitor ticked on, steady as a metronome. Then Evelyn coughed. Once, twice. Dry at first, then deeper, tugging at her chest. The line on the screen skipped and quickened, numbers brightening. Marina rose, one hand already reaching for the call button, the other hovering near the box as if to shield it from a draft no one else could feel. The city glittered below, a mosaic of lights stretching toward the Hudson. But Nathaniel Cross hardly noticed. He sat alone in his penthouse, a glass of scotch untouched on the table beside him. The bracelet around his wrist caught the glow of the chandelier above. Gold wings, forever frozen in mid-flight. Turquoise stone, burning faintly like a captive flame. He turned his hand slowly, the light shifting along the feathers. For the first time in years, he was studying it not as an heirloom, but as a question. Marina's words at the diner clung to him. "My mom has a bracelet just like yours." Impossible. Or was it? Nathaniel rose and crossed to the far wall where shelves of leather-bound volumes stood like sentinels. A concealed panel opened under his touch, revealing a steel cabinet. From within, he pulled a folio stamped with the Cross family crest. The archives, assembled meticulously across generations, detailing everything from ship manifests to philanthropic endowments. A curated story of endurance, success, power. He carried the folio to his desk, flipped it open, and skimmed through pages yellowed with age. Sketches of early factories, contracts signed by his grandfather, photographs of great-grandfather Alaric shaking hands with senators, and then an entry under Family Heirlooms. Ambiguous bracelet, commission 1922, crafted by Parisian artisan Michel Dubois. Symbol of rebirth after the panic of 1921, to be passed through the line of heirs. Nathaniel traced the ink with his finger, familiar lines he had read before. But lower on the page, almost hidden in the margin, was a faint annotation in different handwriting. Deux bracelets. 2 bracelets. His jaw tightened. He adjusted the lamp to illuminate the scrawl, heart beating faster. The note was dated the same year, unsigned. If true, then the bracelet was not unique. Bathrooms leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For as long as he could remember, the Cross family legend had been built on absolutes: resilience, singularity, power. His father had told him the bracelet was proof of that heritage. We always rise. Yet here lay evidence that undermined the myth. Unmistake a second bracelet meant a second story. The intercom buzzed. He pressed the button, his voice sharp. "Send her in." Homeland later, Claudine Mercer entered, her heels tapping softly on the marble floor. Impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, she carried her usual air of efficiency. "You asked for me this late, Nathaniel?" He gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit. There's something I need handled, quietly." Claudine sat, folding her hands neatly. Go on. At the diner earlier tonight, a waitress recognized this bracelet. He tapped the gold with 2 fingers, the sound ringing faintly in the quiet room. She claimed her mother owns one identical to it. Identical, Claudine. You understand the problem. Her brow arched slightly, though her voice remained level. Names? Marina Duval. Her mother, Evelyn Duval. I want everything. Birth certificates, employment records, family ties, and I want it done without leaving a footprint. She nodded once, already making mental calculations. Consider it underway. They closed the folio, his thumb lingering on the phrase, do bracelets. There's more. I found references to 2 bracelets commissioned, not one. My great-uncle Daniel, you know the family story, branded a traitor, erased. But what if he wasn't a thief? What if he was something else? Dable, for the first time Claudine hesitated. You suspect a deliberate omission. Submerged. I suspect a fabrication, he corrected coldly. The cross name is built on continuity. What if that continuity is a lie? Subjected scotch sat untouched. Nathaniel poured it into the sink instead, the amber liquid vanishing down the drain. He could not drink with questions circling him like wolves. Sane stood, smoothing her jacket. I'll begin tonight. Discretion as always. She paused at the door, glancing back. If there were 2 bracelets, Nathaniel, then someone else carries a claim. Be prepared for what we find. Sane. He didn't answer. He only stared once more at the turquoise stone, its surface catching the reflection of the city's restless lights. The bracelet was no longer just an heirloom, it was a threat. The phone on his desk buzzed an hour later. Claudine's voice came through, steady but edged with something new. Wait, perhaps. There's a name, she said. Owen Whitlock. The line went quiet except for Nathaniel's breathing, sharp and deliberate, as the foundation of his family story began to tilt beneath him. Morning thinned the night at St. Mary's, soft light slipping around the blinds and washing the small room in a pale calm. Marina pulled the chair close and set her elbows on her knees, palms open on her thighs, the way she used to sit during school conferences, ready to listen but braced for the part that hurt. The velvet box rested on the tray table, shut now, a square of blue that seemed to hold its own weather. Mom, she said gently, I need you to tell me the truth about the bracelet. Evelyn looked smaller in the morning, as if sleep had folded her into herself. She rubbed the inside of her wrist where a watch might have been. You saw something last night that you can't unsee, she said, reading her daughter's face the way only a mother can. All right, sit closer. Marina slid the chair until her knees touched the mattress. The monitor kept time, not urgent, not lazy, just there, the heartbeat of the room. My father, your granddad, Owen, Evelyn began, was an engineer who brought ideas home the way other men brought home fishing stories. He drew on the backs of envelopes, in the margins of church bulletins. He talked about gears at the dinner table, not because anyone asked him to, but because it made his eyes light up. A brief smile touched her mouth and went. He had a design for a turbine gearing system, clean, efficient, something he swore would outlast any fad. He said it would keep lights on without swallowing people whole. Egoin stared at the box as if it might answer for her. Word of it got around. These things do. He told one colleague, and that colleague mentioned it to someone else. And before long, 2 men came to our kitchen on a weekday afternoon. They did not shout. They did not even sit down. They laid papers on the table like a play setting. Called it a transfer agreement and the confidentiality clause. She closed her eyes, briefly. They said it was better for everyone if the work belonged elsewhere, for stability, for the sake of the country, for our sake. Corporate felt the old apartment rise up in oleum, the chip salt shaker, the tea towel with a rooster on it. She could almost hear a soft knock on that thin door. They knew my school schedule, Evelyn went on, voice even, as though steadiness could dull the memory's edge. They knew when your grandmother took the bus, which day of the week the landlord came to collect. They spoke kindly. That was the worst part. They said accidents happen when people are tired, and the world is a tiring place. Then Marina's hand found the cool rail of the bed. What did Grandpa do? What he thought would keep his family from harm. Evelyn looked out toward the square of light at the window. He signed. There was an envelope, too, money that could cover a move, a down payment on a quieter life. They called it a consulting fee, as if that word could dress a wound. Her mouth tightened. For a moment she seemed to age and then return to herself. We packed in 2 days. He boxed up his notebooks and said we were going where the air was cleaner. "And the bracelet?" Marina asked softly. Evelyn reached toward the box but stopped short, as if touching it would pull her farther back than she could afford to go. "He gave it to me the night before we left, said it was a promise from a man he trusted once, a man who believed the soul of a thing mattered as much as its strength. Your granddad said if the story ever came knocking, that bracelet would be the only polite way to answer the door. One day he told me this will be proof we were not just dreaming." Marina lifted the lid. The phoenix lay quiet but full of motion, wings poised, turquoise eyes steady. It looked different in morning light, less dramatic than under diner bulbs, more sure of itself. She remembered small hands resting on her mother's knee, the weight of the metal in the center of her palm, the way Evelyn had said, "This isn't for wearing, it's for keeping." After we moved, Evelyn said, he stopped building. Not entirely. Once you are that kind of man, you can't stop. But he stopped in the ways that count on paper. He took a job that asked little of him and gave little back. The light in him dimmed. He still told me the names of machines as if they were saints, but he spoke more softly, and some sentences never found their ends. Confiscated, a cart rattled down the hallway and faded. Marina let the silence hold for a moment because it seemed right to let the story breathe. "He didn't just steal his work," Evelyn said, almost to the window. "They stole his soul." The words landed heavy and exact, the kind of truth that doesn't give you a choice. Marina's eyes stung, but she held them dry, the way you do when someone else needs the room to cry. She closed the box again and kept her palm on it, as if the metal could sense the warmth. "Why keep it a secret so long?" she asked. "Because secrets sometimes feel like fences," Evelyn answered. "They keep wolves out until you remember they also keep you in. I wanted you to have a life that wasn't measured against a ledger someone else wrote. But secrets get old, and old things want air." Marina nodded. The anger she had carried out of the diner shifted into something steadier, not a blaze, but a coal that would not go out. "If those men came once, the story can come again," she said quietly. "Only this time it will have to meet us in daylight." Miss Lyd watched her for a long moment, the smallest pride lifting the lines at the corners of her eyes. "You always were your grandfather's girl," she whispered. "You listen until the meaning shows its face." The heart monitor tapped along, then hiccuped. Evelyn coughed, first a small sound, then a deeper pull that seemed to tug at the fine bones of her chest. The numerals on the screen climbed, the rhythm quickening like a runner taking an unexpected hill. Marina rose, one hand already moving toward the call button. She leaned close, voice low and steady, the promise forming as naturally as breath. "Then I'll find the truth, Mom." The long drive to Cross Manor curled through old oaks and low stone walls slick with moss, the kind of Connecticut landscape that looked unchanged by decades. Nathaniel hadn't been here in years. He told himself it was because business kept him in the city, but as the iron gates swung open and the big house revealed itself, brick and slate, steep roofs, rows of windows like watchful eyes, he understood another reason. The place remembered too much. Inside, the air wore the scent of beeswax and old paper. Portraits lined the corridor, stern men with a family jaw and women whose expressions were all restraint. The library waited at the end of the hall, paneled in dark wood, its ceiling coffered and high. Light from a cloudy morning poured across a long table sewn with dust motes, each one turning in the air as if making up its mind. "Still chasing ghost stories?" Russell Cross lounged in the doorway with a snifter of brandy, the casual posture of a man who had never needed to rush. A cousin by blood, a stranger by choice, he wore charm like a tie, easy to put on, easier to take off? Or have you finally come to donate the bracelet to the family museum? Nathaniel set his briefcase on the table and slid out a pair of thin gloves. I'm here for the archives. Friedrich, you are. Russell's smile didn't reach his eyes. He stepped into the room and tapped the glass case of a model ship. You know how this goes. You'll find a letter from a senator, a ledger full of good news, a photograph of grandfather cutting a ribbon. It's all very reassuring. Reassurance isn't what I'm after. Nathaniel crossed to a bank of flat files built into the wall. The brass label on one drawer read Correspondence W. Cross. He drew it open. Inside were bundles tied with faded ribbon, each packet marked in a neat, decisive hand. He chose one stamped with an innocuous word, security, and carried it to the table. Russell watched him as if the scene were a play he already knew the ending to. You know, he said, swirling his drink, the older generation had a flair for melodrama. Ghosts and traitors and curses, anything to make a quarterly report sound like an epic. Some epics are only ledgers with better lighting, Nathaniel said. He untied the ribbon. The top letter was crisp despite its age. To Head of Security sat beneath the date, followed by 3 pages of tidy paragraphs and margins annotated in a sharper pen. The tone was polite, almost pastoral, the way a man might discuss landscaping or a faulty boiler. Only the nouns stung. Observation unit, subject, risk profile, domestic routines, not names, never names. Knackout, either followed the first, then a third, the language cooling as it advanced. Increased exposure, one line said, a reminder may be in order. Another, we prefer clean solutions. He felt something in him respond, a tightening, the mind's instinct to parse euphemism back into blunt meaning. The 4th letter was shorter, 2 paragraphs, a closing, a signature. The important words sat in the middle like a stone in a brook. Subject has been neutralized, assets secured. Conquered, Nathaniel stared at the phrase until it seemed to draw the room inward. Neutralized. He knew the term from boardroom talk, where you neutralized a rumor or a rival's advantage. Here, in the softened diction of a family letter, it suggested waters made still, a house quieted. A life moved off the board without the inconvenience of naming what exactly had been done. He set the page down carefully, as if it might bruise. The library's silence seemed to swell. Outside, a crow called once from the branches, a flat, ancient sound that might have belonged to any century. Russell took a leisurely sip. Find anything thrilling? Troubling, Nathaniel said. Troubling builds character. Russell placed his glass on a coaster shaped like a crest. You've always had a taste for sturdiness, Nate. Look at you. Gloves, posture, the works. Still the heir who believes in polishing the silver, even when the roof leaks. Nathaniel ignored the jab. He reached for another bundle. Foundations and Philanthropy, and slid it aside, then returned to security. The 5th letter referenced travel. The 6th included a list, times, locations, patterns that described a family without ever writing the family's name. He read until the columns of ink began to blur. In the glass of the bookcase across from him, he caught his own reflection, the careful suit, the bracelet bright against the cuff, and behind it, the layered reflections of his ancestors in oil and varnish. He felt, for a clipped moment, the old pride rise to argue. The Cross name had built factories and funded libraries, backed clinics and scholarships. The Cross name had hired and housed, sponsored and saved. Pride wanted to tally contributions like a defense attorney. But the word would not move. Neutralized. Pledged the file. Who kept these? He asked, half to the room. Nihol keeps what we don't throw away, Russell said lightly. And we've always been frugal with our trash. Nathaniel turned. Did you know these letters were here? I know plenty of things are here, Russell said, selecting a leather chair and easing into it. I also know context is a marvelous detergent. It removes stains for the price of a story. The 60s were untidy. Everyone did what they had to do. Everyone? Nathaniel repeated. or just the people who could afford to call it necessary afterward? Russell's smile flattened. You've been living in glass for too long. Out here, we still build with stone. Stones have weight. They don't care about your feelings. They care about balance. Nathaniel slid the letters back into their envelope, then placed the bundle in his briefcase. He didn't yet know what the documents proved, only what they suggested, that the family history used the passive voice for a reason. At the doorway, Russell rose. You know what I appreciate about you, he said, voice warm again as if they had simply finished a game of cards. You still think that every question has a clean answer if you pay enough attention. He stepped closer, and for the first time his eyes were not amused. Attention is expensive, cousin. So is curiosity. Haniel held his gaze. And silence? Silence, Russell said, is an investment. They stood that way for a breath, the house listening. Somewhere deeper in the manor, a clock chimed a muted hour. Nathaniel closed his briefcase and reached for his coat. Russell moved aside, but lingered at the threshold, brandy glass balanced in his fingertips as if he were trying to see how close to the edge he could hold it without spilling. Be careful what you dig up, cousin, he said softly, the pleasantry worn smooth by warning. Some things were buried because they bite. Nathaniel stepped past him into the corridor of portraits, carrying the old words like a fresh weight. The library door clicked shut behind him, and the house resumed its practiced quiet, as if nothing had been disturbed at all. The public library sat back from Main Street behind two maples that shook off the rain in slow silver shivers. Inside, the air was warm and papery, the kind of quiet that made people soften their voices without being told. Marina signed the visitor log out of habit and wiped a damp sleeve on her jeans. The afternoon had settled into a steady drizzle. The windows were fogged at the corners like glasses set down on the tablecloth. Sierra Bloom appeared from between the stacks with a tote bag on her shoulder and a pencil tucked behind one ear. You look like a woman on a mission, she said, smiling, then took in Marina's face more closely. And like you didn't sleep. Marina said, Where's the archive room? Sierra led her to a glassed-in space at the back where a microfilm reader lived next to a long wooden table. Metal drawers held reels labeled by hand. A cart carried bound volumes of the County Herald, edges browned. The room held the patient smell of glue and cotton string. I can stay, Sierra offered, or I can bring you coffee and keep the gossips in the front room from inventing a story about why you're here. Coffee would be a kindness. Marina ran her fingers along the drawer labels. I'm looking for a name that may not want to be found. Those are the only ones that matter, Sierra said, and slipped out. Marina pulled a reel and fed it into the reader, hands moving the way you do when you've watched someone else do it a dozen times. The screen bloomed with grainy columns. Headlines spoke of fairs and parades and factory expansions. She scrolled, the film clicking softly, rain tapping the windows in counterpoint. She searched without dates, trusting the thread of the story more than a calendar. Every so often, she paused to jot a note, a reference to Cross Industries sponsoring a scholarship, a piece about a visiting lecturer from New York. None of it touched the bracelet, the phoenix, the man who had spoken like truth belonged to him. Sierra returned with 2 paper cups. Library coffee, she warned, which is to say, loyal, not glamorous. Marina traded the reel for a bound volume, then another. The bindings creaked like old knees. Somewhere in the library, the clock chimed and went quiet again. The small world of the archive room set its own time. With an advertisement for a new washing machine, she found a small boxed notice about a talk at the town hall. Innovation and responsibility. The speaker listed as Daniel W. Cross. Affiliation private. The text was brief. The speech had been postponed. Next to the piece, someone had penciled a faint note, initials only, the kind a careful librarian might leave for herself. See Ledger, Dubois, Paris. The pencil had been erased roughly, as if someone changed their mind about leaving breadcrumbs. Marina exhaled slowly. Daniel W. Cross, she murmured. Not in the family brochures. Misleading leaned over her shoulder. W for what? Answer field ended. Whitlock, she said quietly, the name sitting between them like a coin. Daniel Whitlock Cross. Flushed to the microfilm again. There he was in a society page photograph, hat brim shadowing his eyes, captioned only D.W. Cross, with local patrons. No mention in the family histories in Nathaniel's office. No smiling portrait on a wall. Between appearances, he seemed to thin out like fog, and then, in a later volume, he was gone altogether. A follow-up column that should have announced his rescheduled talk contained only a line: Speaker unavailable. In the index of names at the back, the line for Cross, Daniel, had been neatly crossed through in blue ink. Sierra tapped the page with a fingernail. You're stepping into a storm, Marina. I know. She didn't look away from the photograph. But storms water things. They don't just tear them up. The last bound volume on the cart had a pocket pasted to its inside cover. Tucked there was a folded sheet, a photocopy, thin and overexposed, as if someone had rushed the job. Across the top, Dubois and Fee, commissions. The handwriting sloped in a fine European hand. Marina bent closer, heart steadying into a hard, useful beat. The copy was poor, but a phrase in the margin had survived the light. Pour les bâtisseurs et les gardiens. Beneath it, an English hand had added in pencil, almost apologetic. One for the builder, one for the guardian. No dates, no signatures. Just the words like a door left ajar. Marina felt the same at the diner, only deeper now, threaded to evidence instead of shock. The bracelet wasn't simply an heirloom. It was one of a pair, made with intention. If the builder kept one, the guardian had carried the other into a different life, and that life had brushed her family's door. She took a picture of the page, careful to include the margin note. She photographed the town hall notice, the photograph with the shadowed brim, the index with the blue strike through the name. She printed a copy of the Dubois sheet on the library's old machine. The toner came out in a thin gray mist, but the words held. What will you do with it? Sierra asked. Show Mom first, Marina said. Then we'll see who else deserves to read it. Happier not knowing the rest, Sierra said gently. Marina slipped the printout into a plastic sleeve the librarian kept for messy hands. Happiness isn't the point. This is about light. You can't ask a room to be bright and then keep the curtains closed. K-word 1. The rain began again in earnest, a soft roar that made the library feel even more like a safe pocket in a loud world. Marina stepped into the hallway, where the signal was better, and sent the photos to her mother with a short message. Found something, 2 bracelets, builder and guardian. She watched the status bar crawl across the screen. When the check marks appeared, she felt both heavier and lighter, as if proof had weight, but also a way of keeping your feet on the ground. She stood there a moment longer, phone warm in her hand, the old words settling into the present like a key turning. Back in the archive room, the bound volumes waited in their quiet parade. Somewhere in them a name had been erased with a cloudless politeness. Marina slid the Dubois copy into her bag and closed the door gently behind her, the rain applauding on the library's roof as if to say, "Carry on." Claudine Mercer's office hovered over Midtown like a glass-lidded jewelry box. From the reception area, you looked straight down at yellow cabs threading the avenues and pedestrians holding their umbrellas at a careful tilt. Nathaniel arrived without his usual entourage, coat damp at the shoulders, expression set. Claudine met him at the door to her inner office with a folder so thick it bowed in the middle. "You asked for everything," she said, closing the door behind them. "This is everything I could gather without leaving footprints." She set the file on the table between 2 low armchairs. "Start with the banking section." The bracelet at his wrist clicked softly against the folder's metal fastener, a small sound that sharpened the room's quiet. He opened to a tab marked with her meticulous handwriting. Financial, Whitlock. Inside were scans of ledgers, photocopies of deposit slips, and a short summary typed on heavy paper. "Most of this comes from a modest savings bank," Claudine said, perching on the opposite chair. Branch records were microfilmed back then. A retired manager remembered the account because of the amount and the instructions. One deposit only. Then silence. Nath was a single line out of place in a sea of small numbers. The deposit dwarfed the entries around it, a sum that could lift a family and quiet a conscience if you were determined enough to call that blessing. "Late in the 60s, Claudine continued, "a few days after your grandfather's legal team drew up a stack of paperwork with a local notary, I found a memo on your side of the fence, unsigned, cautious. It references an assignment of rights and a protective clause." Nathiel's mouth thinned. "Protective for whom?" "For the name on your building, not the one on that passbook." She tapped the deposit line. "There's no monthly cadence, no employer trail, no tax withholding attached to that particular entry. It came through a holding company that no longer exists, except as a file jacket in a basement. The description uses a favorite word from that era, consulting." He set the paper down, the edges rasped under his fingertips. "We paid him off." Claudine's eyes stayed on his. "It was hush money." The words were spare enough to fit in the room without knocking anything over, and they left no room for the old family euphemisms. Nathaniel felt the file grow heavier in his lap. In his head, ledger language shifted back into human speech. A kitchen table, 2 visitors who never raised their voices, a pen that shook just enough to make a notary pause and then continue anyway. "There's more," Claude tabbed forward. "Correspondence from your grandfather's office. Nothing explicit, of course, but I've practiced law long enough to hear the silence between the lines. Assure compliance. Stabilize exposure." And then, 2 weeks later, a report that the engineer has relocated and withdrawn from professional associations. She let the facts sit. "It's the playbook, Nathaniel. Quiet the claim, erase the trail, rename the origin until even the origin doubts itself." He looked beyond her to the window, to the damp light smudging the edge of the skyline. He tried on the arguments he'd been taught to wear. The era was different. The stakes were national. The company employs thousands. The foundation funds hospitals. Each one floated for a moment, then sank. "Marina said truth doesn't need a suit," he murmured, surprising himself with the memory. He could still see the diner's tired lights reflected in her eyes. He had dismissed her as a person who mistook resemblance for proof. Now the paperwork on his knees insisted that she had mistaken nothing. Claudine studied him for a beat, not unkindly. "This will bruise the story your father liked to tell." "Erkin, he preferred the story to the facts," Nathaniel said, and heard how thin the defense sounded even in his own voice. He returned to the folder. A notarized agreement sat there like a pressed leaf, flat, preserved, all veins visible. The language was tidy, written to soothe. Assignment, consideration, covenant not to contest. There was even a paragraph about mutual respect. He had read enough contracts to know when words were being used to line a pit. Condoms a few more pages and found a slip of paper clipped to a letterhead he recognized from Cross Industries' early days. In a margin, a narrow hand had scrawled, "Ensure no future assertions. Family sensitivities involved." The phrase caught him like a thorn. Family, not business. Whose family? "Underestimated. How clean do you need this?" Claudine asked. "If you want a press release that sounds like resolve, I can draft. If you want something that holds up in the bright light of a courtroom, we'll need to go slower and ask for documents your relatives won't happily share." "I'm not thinking about a press release," Nathaniel said. His voice had dropped into a register that rarely left the boardroom. "I'm thinking about a woman who slept beside a velvet box for years because a promise told her to keep it close. I'm thinking about a man who signed to keep his family breathing." Claudine nodded once, a small concession to feeling. "Then you're thinking about the right people." He closed the folder and sat back. The bracelet slid along his wrist and settled. It felt heavier than it ever had, as if the gold had been carrying more than metal all along. Across the stone, a vein of blue flashed and went still. "We call it legacy," he said, as if the word guarantees goodness. "What if we've been using it as a veil? Then you lift it, Claudine said simply. Knee in the pane of glass behind her, Manhattan was a muted watercolor. Rain stippling rooftops, steam breathing from vents, the grid shining in patient lines. Nathaniel pictured the portraits in the manor, the way their painted eyes followed you down the hall. He heard Russell's voice, easy and dangerous. Context is a marvelous detergent. He heard another voice, older. We always rise. On what? He stood, the folder under his arm, and adjusted his cuff. Claudine watched him the way you watch someone recognize their own reflection after years of seeing only the frame. You'll need allies, she said, and you'll need to choose them where they don't look like you. He didn't argue. He didn't talk about boards or committees or the cousins who would prefer that the past remain polite. He only looked down at the phoenix, its wings caught mid-beat, its small stone eye clear as a raindrop on a window. His throat worked. The question that had been pacing inside him finally spoke aloud, quiet enough to belong to the room and not the skyline. Who was Daniel really? The hospital courtyard smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp leaves. Autumn wind chased yellow maple blades across the concrete, swirling them around the benches and settling them against the low brick wall. Marina stepped outside with her arms folded, needing air after the beeping monitors and the sight of her mother's fragile rest. She hadn't expected to see him there, Nathaniel Cross, dark coat buttoned high, standing near the curb like a figure from another world. Her pulse jumped, half anger, half something she couldn't name. You shouldn't be here, she said sharply, though her voice was low so it wouldn't carry inside. He turned, eyes steadier than before. In his hand was a slim folder, the edges damp from the mist. I didn't come to argue, he said. I came because you were right. Right? About what? My family being thieves? Nathaniel shook his head. He extended the folder, not quite close enough to touch her. About my family taking what wasn't theirs. These are copies, bank records, contracts. The sum your grandfather received wasn't payment for service. It was money to buy his silence. His jaw tightened. The empire I inherited rests on that lie. Marina hesitated, staring at the folder as though it might burn her. When she finally took it, the paper felt heavier than its weight. She flipped through the pages, seeing her grandfather's name, the numbers that looked like both rescue and betrayal. Her throat closed, unfairly. So now what? She whispered. You think showing me this makes us even? No, Nathaniel said. For the first time, his voice carried something like humility. It makes us bound to the same truth. If we're going to uncover who Daniel really was, we can't do it alone. You have one half of the story, I have the other. There yet searching. Around them the courtyard went quiet except for the restless wind. Inside, Evelyn had wheeled herself to the window. She caught sight of the two figures in the courtyard, her daughter and the man whose name carried both wealth and ruin. Her lips moved in a whisper meant only for herself. Be careful, Marina. Outside, Marina closed her chest like a shield. If I do this, she said slowly, it's for my mother, for my grandfather, not for you. Nathaniel inclined his head. Then we agree on the reason. New York holds the archives, the ledgers, the rest of the names. That's where we go next. Marina didn't answer right away. She let the autumn wind whip her hair across her face, let the weight of the choice settle. At last she gave a single nod. Nedge, they stood side by side in the fading light, uneasy partners bound by history's broken promises, both staring toward a city where the truth waited, still buried, but no longer safe. Russell met Nathaniel halfway across the marble floor of the great room, a brandy glass tilting in his fingers and a half-smile cut into his face like a notch on a blade. The room itself was staged to impress. Antlers above the stone mantel, carpets thick enough to quiet footsteps, portraits that measured visitors with calm, proprietary eyes. You came back quickly, Russell said, holding out the spare hand as if they were at a garden party. Family air clears the head. Or clouds it, Nathaniel replied. He didn't take the drink offered from a sideboard. He didn't sit. The bracelet at his wrist flashed once in the firelight and went still. The mantle, savoring a slow swallow. "I hear you've been spelunking. Archives, old drawers, letters with foxed edges." He splayed his fingers. "If you want the condensed version, I can save you the dust." Daniel, our favorite specter, was ambition dressed as virtue. He tried to pull the company sideways, whispered to the wrong people, took what wasn't his and called it a vision. Grandfather, cut him loose. Tragic, tidy, done. Criar, convenient, Nathaniel said. History prefers a clean counter. Russell's smile widened, not warmer. The bracelet you wear became the emblem of order. Whatever trinket he carried, if he carried one, was the emblem of poor judgment. Nathaniel studied his cousin's face, the micro-expressions hidden under easy charm. "Where did you hear that version?" "Presumption, from men who had nothing to gain by lying," Russell said, turning the glass so the fire painted an amber circle on the ceiling. "And from ledgers that don't argue." He set the glass down, stepped closer. "Look, Nate, we're custodians. We protect the name so the buildings stay open and the checks keep flowing. That requires trimming the story now and then. No one wants a family legend with splinters." Nathaniel let silence do the measuring. The tale fit too neatly. Saint and sinner, tidy cause, tidy cure. It felt rehearsed, like something practiced in the mirror of this very room until every wrinkle ironed flat. "You're not worried about truth," he said quietly. "You're worried about control." Russell's eyes cooled a degree. He reached to the sideboard and straightened a frame by a fraction. Control prevents panic. Panic sinks ships. He picked up his glass again, voice lowering as if the walls had ears. Some truths are best buried. There it was, not advice, not philosophy, but warning. Nathaniel thought of the letters labeled security, of the euphemisms polished until they shone. He felt with a steadiness that surprised him the hinge of the conversation lock into place. "What happens if they're not?" he asked. Russell's smile returned, thinner, like a knife that had lost its sheath. "Then you make peace with rubble, and I don't think you enjoy rubble." Nathaniel looked past him to the portraits, then back to the brandy, the hearth, the patient furniture. For the first time he saw how the room had been arranged to keep certain things in front and certain things out of sight. Russell wasn't merely repeating an old myth. He was curating it, ready to trade it when the price was right. "You're positioning yourself," Nathaniel said. "If I flinch, you fill the space." "Don't be melodramatic," Russell murmured. "I'm merely practical." Practical, like a hand on a lever. Practical, like a foot on a throat, Nathaniel thought, and felt the decision he had avoided come to meet him. The family story would not police itself. The steward had to choose whether he kept the vault shut or opened it to light. A shadow moved beyond the tall windows, the faint suggestion of a figure at the wrought iron gate, still as a question mark in the drizzle. Head turned, hand on the rail. Nathaniel's gaze flicked that way. Russell followed it, then dismissed what he saw as a groundskeeper or a neighbor walking a dog. The smile returned to its perch. "Stay, cousin. We'll draft the right language. The world loves a polished sentence." Nathaniel didn't answer. He could just make out a familiar stance beyond the ironwork, the outline of a woman holding herself against the rain. Marina, watching the house that kept its stories under glass. The west wing of Cross Manor had always felt like a mausoleum. Unused corridors and locked doors that smelled faintly of polish and dust. Nathaniel carried no light but the narrow beam of a brass lamp he had found near the stairs. Its glow was dim, throwing long shadows across portraits and cabinets. He pushed open the door to the study, hinges groaning as if resenting the intrusion. Inside, the air was heavy, filled with the scent of parchment long undisturbed. The desk was broad oak, stacked with boxes tied in fading ribbon. Shelves lined the walls, their contents slumped from age, folders, correspondence, brittle papers that whispered when touched. Nathaniel set the lamp down and began to search. Smiled open drawers yellowed with decades. Receipts, society invitations, newsletters, all meant to look benign, but in a thin box, tucked beneath heavier ledgers, he found something else. Letters dated in the 1960s, each addressed to William Cross. Nathaniel's pulse quickened. The handwriting was careful, yet the subject line on one envelope sent a chill through him. Surveillance update. Whitlock family. Conserved the first sheet. The language was clinical, almost bureaucratic. Notes about Owen Whitlock's daily routine, a list of places Evelyn had been seen as a child, phrases like household stable and subject compliant. It read less like business and more like quiet intimidation. He set the paper down, heart tightening. A second letter detailed banking activity, numbers that matched the payout Claudine had shown him. Only now, the words were starker. Funds transferred. Neutralized. Asset secured. Neutralized. He mouthed the word, bile rising at the thought of how easily men in suits had erased another man's livelihood, maybe his life's work with a single term. In the bottom of the box, half buried beneath receipts, he uncovered a single page torn from a notebook. Ink blotched, the handwriting hurried. 4 words sprawled across it. Daniel is the key. Minimized, Faniel froze, staring at the phrase until the lamp's flame flickered. Here it was, the first undeniable connection. Daniel wasn't a myth, wasn't just the family's whispered shame. He had been real, present, woven into Owen Whitlock's story. And someone, decades later, had been desperate enough to warn William Cross that Daniel still held power. Position's floor creaked. Nathaniel's head snapped up. From the hallway came the unmistakable rhythm of approaching footsteps, measured, unhurried, but drawing closer. Russell. Nathaniel shoved the note back into the box, closed the lid, and slid it beneath the desk. He swept the loose papers into a drawer, forcing it shut just as the doorknob rattled faintly. "Still awake, cousin?" Russell's voice floated through the wood, light and careless. Nathaniel leaned against the desk, schooling his breathing, the lamp casting calm shadows over his face. "Couldn't sleep," he called back. "The house remembers too much." Behind the door, Russell chuckled, low and knowing. "Yes, it does." The footsteps lingered, then retreated, when the silence thickened again. But the phrase still echoed in his mind, louder than Russell's footsteps, louder than the manor's walls. Daniel is the key. The glow of the oversized monitor filled Nathaniel's office, the city glittering far below like scattered embers. Marina sat forward in her chair, eyes locked on the high-resolution scan of a jeweler's ledger from Paris. The ink, though faded, was still legible. Her finger traced a line in the margin, voice trembling as she whispered, "That's not Dreamer. It says Guardian of the Soul." She turned toward Nathaniel, breath unsteady. "It was never meant to be rivalry. It was meant to be protection." Nathaniel leaned closer, scrolling down. A later note appeared, dated 1945. Request by Daniel Pierce. Inscribe the name Owen inside the band. From the page, Marina's throat tightened. Her grandfather's name, etched into history, tied forever to the bracelet. Tears blurred her vision as the truth settled over her. "He kept his promise. Mom was right," she murmured. Nathaniel's jaw hardened, his reflection caught in the glass. He spoke low, almost to himself. Daniel wasn't erased. He was the heir. The old bedroom in Cross Manor held the stale scent of furniture polish and lavender sachets, a museum of careful habits. Nathaniel sat on the edge of the carved bed with a slim journal open across his knees. The paper had yellowed to the color of weak tea. His grandfather's hand, once so firm in annual reports, wavered here, letters hooked and crowded, as if the words wanted to outrun the truth they carried. Crone. Must protect the name. A page later, stories control the fire, keep the story. And, scratched in a hurried slope, Daniel, too dangerous to remember. The phrases tolled like a muffled bell. Nathaniel looked up at the mirror. A man in a good suit, the phoenix bright at his wrist, a silhouette stitched to a lineage he could no longer defend. Loyalty had been his compass, but the needle spun now, pointing not to family, but to the thing family had buried. He closed the journal and felt the room grow heavier. Silence, he saw, was an inheritance too, and accepting it made him partner to the theft. He stood, breath even at last. I will face Russell. At the gala. Chandeliers poured warm light over the plaza's ballroom, gilding rows of round tables and a small forest of crystal vases. A quartet threaded soft music through the hum of donors and board members, waiters moving like clock hands with silver trays. Nathaniel stood near the wings of the stage, tie straight, expression unreadable. Marina hovered beside him, one hand on the handle of her mother's wheelchair. Evelyn's face was pale, but steady. On stage, Russell owned the room. He lifted his glass in a practiced smile, generosity spilling from his sentences like confetti. He thanked patrons, invoked legacy, promised brighter tomorrows. Cameras winked. The crowd obliged with polished laughter. Communic, the curtain, Marina and Nathaniel exchanged a single, simple nod. The monitor screen was cued. The microphone waited. Nathaniel's fingers brushed the bracelet, then fell to his side. And now, Russell announced, a reminder of who we are at our best. He gestured grandly toward the wings. Marina rolled Evelyn forward. The room shifted. First curiosity, then a hush that felt like velvet pulled tight. Evelyn reached for the microphone, hands trembling but sure. Her eyes found Russell's, then the audience. My father kept your secret, she said, voice thin but caring. But I won't. Silence held the ballroom so tightly you could hear the chandeliers breathe. Evelyn's voice met the microphone and steadied. When I was a girl, 2 courteous men visited our kitchen, she said. They laid down papers and a promise. Sign and your family will be safe. My father, Owen Whitlock, signed. He called it survival. They called it business. A murmur rippled. Forks hovered in midair. She lifted the velvet box from her lap and opened it so the lights caught the gold. This bracelet was his last honest sentence. He said one day it would be proof. Marina at the tech console tapped a key. The big screens bloomed with the Paris ledger, the elegant French margin, then the penciled translation, one for the builder, one for the guardian of the soul. Another image followed, a 1945 note, inscribed the name Owen. Gasps, then a rustle like wind in wheat. Cameras swung to Russell. A smile flickered, failed. Evelyn went on, gentle and unyielding. Your fortune asked my father to disappear. We lived with that request for a lifetime. Questions fired across tables. Donors leaned forward. The quartet fell silent mid-phrase. Nathaniel stood behind the curtain, face set, as if choosing to breathe was an act of will. Russell surged to the foot of the stage, color high. You fools, he burst out, voice cracking through the hush. I kept us safe until now. Camera flashes stitched white stitches through the air, each burst catching a different truth on a different face. The ballroom, moments ago satin smooth, rippled with whispers in the scrape of chairs. Russell stood center floor, breath fast, brandy heat high in his cheeks, forgetting that the microphone clipped to his lapel still burned green. You don't understand, he barked, chopping the air. I kept the donors calm, the press in line. I buried the old mess so the checks would clear. That's leadership. Gasps rose, then the soft, terrible hush of recognition. He pushed on, words rushing past his caution. We neutralized the problem years ago. I made sure the Whitlock business stayed in a drawer where it belonged. Claudine stepped from the aisle with the steady grace of a judge entering chambers. She carried a slim case and opened it at the foot of the stage. Letters, bank copies, the memo with neutralized underlined in an old, patient hand. "These are duplicates," she said evenly, "and more wait in safekeeping." Phones lifted, heads turned away from Russell like flowers tracking a new light. Neil donors, who had once clasped his arm, now withdrew their hands. The quartet set their bows in their laps. Marina stood beside Evelyn's chair, eyes dry, spine straight. Nathaniel climbed the steps, the phoenix bright at his wrist, and faced the room that had built him. The cross legacy ends tonight. Morning washed the hospital room in a quiet gold, soft as a prayer. The machines clicked and hummed the way kettles do in a sleepy kitchen. Outside, a cart rattled down the hall. Ordinary life resuming after a night that changed everything. Marina stood by the window, hand on the curtain. Nathaniel stepped in, carrying a slim leather folder and a calm he hadn't worn before. "I've filed the paperwork," he said, setting the folder on the tray table. "The Daniel Owen Cross Foundation, for independent inventors and the caretakers who keep their work alive. First grants go to community labs and to the Whitlock estate in honor of Owen." Evelyn's eyes filled, no leaf long deferred. Marina opened the velvet box and gently set her family's bracelet on the table. Nathaniel slid off his own and placed it beside hers. Twin phoenixes, wings paused in the same beat, turquoise eyes catching the morning. Evelyn reached out, fingertips grazing the gold. "You have honored him," she whispered, then looked at Nathaniel. "You have honored yourselves." Evelyn stilled Marina. "The company can build again," he said quietly, "but it needs a conscience. Will you help me put the soul back in?" Marina held his gaze, feeling the weight of the choice and the lightness it promised. "Yes," she said, "we start with the truth and stay with it." Deflated room exhaled. On the little table, the two bracelets gleamed side by side, bright as a vow, the morning sun threading them together like a new beginning. In the end, Marina and Nathaniel's journey reminds us of something timeless. The truth may sleep, but it never dies. A small remark in a diner unraveled a century of lies, proving that even the most powerful legacies must answer to honesty and courage. Family wealth, grand buildings, famous names, none of it matters if it's built on silence and fear. What truly endures is integrity, passed like a light from one generation to the next. Perhaps the deeper question for all of us is this: what legacy are we leaving behind? One of fear or one of truth? As one old saying goes, gold fades, but the honor of a good name shines forever. If this story made you reflect, drop a 1 in the comments. Which state are you watching from? Let's see where our community is growing. To hear more stories that stir the heart and spark reflection, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next one.